Hello friends, welcome to another section of this video. In this demo, I am going to show you how to convert a backup job into a virtual machine, and then I am going to simulate a disaster recovery scenario. And this demo will be done using Symantec Backup EXE version 2014, and these are the points which I am going to cover in this demo. First, I am going to run a full backup of my domain controller, and then I am going to simultaneously convert it into a virtual machine, and then I am going to ping the domain controller and run an NS lookup before the disaster recovery simulation, which means that I will be shutting down the domain controller and then will be trying to recover the domain controller through virtual machine, which has been converted after the backup job has been completed. Start domain controller from virtual machine, which is actually the recovery scenario, and then again we are going to perform a ping and NS lookup after the disaster recovery scenario. Now these are the key points that should be noted down. You should make sure that you give your ESXi host or vCenter details correctly during your backup job scenario, which I will show you. You need to download VMware tools from VMware website. You can Google on that scenario. By default, the network adapter will not be added into your virtual machine. You need to manually add the network adapter to your virtual machine. That is, once the full backup job has been completed, it will convert it into a virtual machine, and that virtual machine will not have a network adapter by default. So during your recovery scenario, you need to add a network adapter manually. So these are the things which I am going to cover today, which is actually convert a backup job into a virtual machine and then simulate a disaster recovery using Symantec Backup EXE version 2014. Before getting into the scenario, let's take a look at our lab details. These are my lab details. I have two servers here running Windows Server 2012 Data Center Edition, and I have one ESX host which is running version 5.1. And these are my lab details. My domain controller, the name of my domain controller is DC, and the fully qualified domain name of my domain controller is dc.myhomelab.local with an IP address of 10.10.0.1, and my backup server, which is the second server, runs on Windows 2012 Data Center Edition. The name of this system is Backup EXE, and the fully qualified domain name is backupexe.myhomelab.local with an IP address of 10.10.0.10. And these are my virtual environment details. I have only one ESX host here with version 5.1, and the name of this ESX host is host1, and the fully qualified domain name of this ESX host is host1.myhomelab.local with an IP address of 10.10.0.3. To access the ESX server, VMware has provided a software called vCenter, which you need to install in order to access your ESX host. And this vCenter server and client has been installed in my Backup EXE server. So the IP address of this vCenter server and client will also be 10.10.0.10. And the vCenter version which I am going to use in this scenario is 5.1, which has been installed in my Backup EXE server. And the entire of this demo is done using VMware Workstation 10. I'll just show you my lab details. This is my domain controller. There you can see it's dc.myhomelab.local with an IP address of 10.10.0.1, and I have created a user in my Active Directory, which is user1. Actually, we are not going to do anything with this user. This is just to show you that during the restoration scenario you will get this user back without any interruption. I will show you during the recovery scenario. And this is my backup EXE server with an IP address of 10.10.0.10. I'll just show you the properties. There you can see it's backupexe.myhomelab.local, and this is my ESX host with an IP address of 10.10.0.3, and the name of this ESX host is host1. Now what we are going to do is actually run a full backup of our domain controller, and then we are going to convert it into a virtual machine. Now I have already done that scenario. I have actually installed my agent onto my domain controller, which is 10.10.0.1, If you want to add an agent to a domain controller, just right click, add server, and then add your IP address or the host name of your domain controller, and the agent will be added to it. Now I have already done that scenario. If you want to know that, or if you are not aware of that scenario, you can watch my earlier videos. Now we are going to run a backup, full backup, and then we are going to convert that full backup into a virtual machine. Let's see how to do that. Right click on your domain controller, select backup. There you can see backup to disk and then convert to virtual machine. There are several options here: backup to disk, and then convert to virtual machine, backup to disk, and simultaneously convert to virtual machine. Now I am going to select the second option, backup to disk, and then convert to virtual machine. Once you selected that, you will receive 3 columns. There you can see the first column will give details about your domain controller with an IP address 10.10.0.1, and the second one will give details about your backup job and your storage details, and the third column will give details about your virtual machine. I'll just show you again. Right click on your domain controller. You can select any three of this option. For this demo, I am going to select the second option, which is backup to disk, and then convert to a virtual machine. Now I am not going to perform any incremental backup for this scenario, so I am going to delete that, and also I am not going to run any schedule for this virtual machine, so I am going to run now. Let's give a name for our job, backup job, full backup of my domain controller. And as you might have watched in my earlier videos, I have provided an E partition which will act as a temporary disk-based storage for my backup exe. It's an 100 GB partition where my backup jobs and details will be stored. Now I have already created that. You can watch my earlier videos on how to do this. You can actually add a disk-based storage. Now I'm going to select that. It's actually my E partition. And since my domain controller runs Active Directory, make sure that you select the granular recovery technology so that you can recover your individual objects, users or computers or groups, etc. Click OK. Now the third tab will give you details about your virtual machine. Click Edit. There you need to provide your host details, which may be VMware or Hyper-V. In this demo I am going to use a VMware. There you can see it's the vCenter client. Using this I am going to access this ESX host, so I don't have a Hyper-V environment in my scenario. You can give any name to your backup job. I am going to convert it immediately after the full job has been completed. You can also schedule at a later time, which I am not going to do right now, which means after the full backup job has been completed, it will immediately convert it to a virtual machine. I am not going to turn any notifications. And the conversion settings, you can specify either ESX server or your Hyper-V. In this scenario I am going with the ESX server. In this tab you can either give your ESX IP address or your vCenter IP address. Now as told earlier, I have installed my vCenter server in this backup exe server with an IP address of 10.10.0.10, but my ESX host is actually resided in the IP address 10.10.0.3. You can give either of the IP address. I will just show you. First let me try with vCenter, which is IP address 10.10.0.10, and you can select. There you can see, because my vCenter is communicating with my ESX host through the vCenter and vSphere client, so it will fetch those details and just provide you. That's the host name which I have given, host1.myhomelab.local, and that's the partition which I have created. It's actually the data store which we call it in VMware, or else you can straight away give your ESX IP address also. In this scenario it's 10.10.0.3. It depends upon your company requirements, but make sure that if you are going to give your ESX host address, you need to select your root account and not your system logon account. So in this scenario I am going to run with the ESX host address, so select, again it will give the same details. This backup exe will contact the ESX host and will give all the details. There you can see it is throwing an error because it's trying to contact my ESX host with a system logon account. So let's change that, and let's change my root as my default account so that my backup exe agent will be able to contact my ESX host. There you can see it has now communicated with my ESX host. There you can see 10.10.0.3 is actually my ESX host, which I have created here with a 4 GB RAM. Now I am going to select this data store so that my virtual machine can be stored in that host. Click on OK. These details will be automatically fetched. And the next one is you can give the name of your virtual machine, which can be anything. So I am going to leave it as it is. By default it's actually VM-DC. Remember, this is actually the virtual machine name and not your operating system name. My operating system name is actually dc.myhomelab.local. So make sure you understand the difference between the operating system name and your virtual machine name. You can give any virtual machine name based on your environment. Now this is where you need to select the VMware tools. You can download these tools from the internet. You can Google on it. Now I have already downloaded that, so let's select that. There you can see I have stored it in my C drive. Click on OK. I'm not going to give 2 GB of RAM. This is a demo purpose, so 1 GB RAM is enough for me. That's the disk configuration. It's actually a 60 GB domain controller. So that's it for this screen. You can either select your Hyper-V or ESX host. I am repeating it again. You can select your host IP address or your vCenter IP address. Make sure you understand the difference between system logon account and your root account. You need to select the virtual machine tools. It's an ISO image you can download from the internet, and you can provide the virtual machine name whichever you want. I am giving it the default, which is VM-DC. So click on OK, and again click on OK. Before that, let's give some name for this demo. Backup and virtual machine convert. Click on OK. Now my full backup will start to run, and then after completion of my full backup, my backup exe server will convert the backup job into a virtual machine. So naturally this will take a lot of time. So I am going to pause this video once the backup job started, and after the completion of the virtual machine conversion, I will resume back. There you can see now my full backup job will start running. Let's click on the status for that. There you can see it's actually started running. It will take a few minutes time, and then after the completion of the full backup, it will convert this backup job into a virtual machine. It will take a lot of time, so I am going to pause this video and I will resume back once the virtual machine has been converted. Before that, I will just show you my virtual machine settings. I don't have any virtual machines here right now. You can see it. These are all actually VMware concept. I have created an ESX host in my data center. and I am giving a name as host1.myhomelab.local. Currently there are no virtual machines here, you can see, but after the completion of this step you can see a virtual machine that it's been created here. During my I will show that during my completion of this virtual machine stage, you can see here that. So I am going to pause this video. There you can see my full backup job has been completed. Now it's been converting to a virtual machine. Again, this will take a lot of time. Already it's 26 minutes. So I'm just pause the video and will resume back. Welcome back. Now the full backup has been completed and it has been completed into a virtual machine. Now to check that, double click on your server. There you can see it has been converted into a full backup and then it has been converted to a virtual machine. Everything has been completed. Now if you log into your vSphere client and check, you can able to check whether your domain controller has been converted to a virtual machine or not. I will do that. There you can see, earlier we didn't see any virtual machines here. Now we are seeing the virtual machine which we have created with the name specified during the backup creation, VM-DC. It's been shut down actually. We need to power it on, but right now I am not going to do it. Let's check the demo details. There you can see, now I have run a full backup of my domain controller and it has been converted into a virtual machine. Now I need to perform a ping and NS lookup before the disaster simulation. Let's do that. Now from my backup exe server I am going to ping my domain controller. There you can see we could able to get a reply because my domain controller is still working. Let's open another command prompt and check NS lookup. Let's run an NS lookup. There you can see we could able to get the details of our domain controller, which is dc.myhomelab.local with an IP address of 10.10.0.1, which is nothing but this domain controller. Now we need to shut the domain controller and manually simulate a disaster. The scenario here is actually, suppose if my domain controller is crashed or due to some disaster scenarios it has been shut down or the power has been offed or any circumstances, how could we recur that scenario? We are going to look into that. So I am going to manually simulate a disaster scenario. So what I am going to do is that I am going to right click and shut down my domain controller. There, before that I will just go through. There you can see I could able to ping my domain controller and I have already run an NS lookup. And the virtual machine which we have converted is still in the power off state. I haven't powered it on. There you can see it's still in the power off state. So what I am going to do is that I am going to right click and initiate a shutdown for my domain controller. Now you could see that my backup exe server will try to make a ping, but it couldn't do that because my domain controller has been initiated a shutdown, which we did it manually to simulate a disaster. There you can see we could able to see the request timed out, and again I am going to perform an NS lookup. There you can see my backup exe server will try to connect my domain controller, but it cannot do it because my domain controller is now shut down. Now what we are going to do is that we are going to perform the fourth step, which is starting the domain controller from the virtual machine. Now what we have did here is actually we have converted our domain controller into a full backup, and that full backup has been converted into a virtual machine which has been stored in our ESX server. There you can see. Now let's power on this VMware. Right click, power on, and let's see what our backup exe server does. There you can see it's still giving request timed out and destination unreachable. At the bottom of this screen you can see whether your virtual machine is powering on or not. It's in the in progress state right now, which means it's trying to start. You can right click it and open it in a new console. Now I'll just pause the video before the server starts up and we'll resume back. There you can see my virtual machine domain controller has started, but still my backup exe server couldn't able to contact that. The reason is that I have told earlier in one of my key points, you need to add your network adapter manually to your virtual machine. This is done in order to avoid any conflict with our already existing domain controller, which you have just shut down. You need to consider your real-time scenarios, so that if my virtual machine is also powered on and also my DC is powered on, you will receive an IP address conflict. So in order to avoid that, the network adapter has been removed, so we need to add it manually. I will show you how to do that. On the VM menu, click Edit Settings. There you can see there is no network adapter. We need to add an Ethernet adapter manually. Click Next, click Finish, click OK. Now the network adapter has been added to my virtual machine. Now let's see if we could able to initiate a ping and communicate with our virtual domain controller. There you can see earlier it was request handout on destination unreachable. Now my backup exe server could able to contact my domain controller. Now let's log into our virtual domain controller and see if we could able to see the user that we have created earlier. Guest, select guest and initiate as a Ctrl+Alt+Delete. Type your password. Now my backup exe server will actually be contacting this virtual domain controller instead of my earlier domain controller, which we have initiated a shutdown. Let's see if we have the created user in our Active Directory, which I showed you earlier. Let's make it full screen. Select Tools, click Active Directory, Users and Computers. There you can see the user one which you have created earlier is still there. It hasn't been deleted. It's still in the working condition. So to make things clear, I will just repeat it again. We have actually initiated a shutdown to our original domain controller, and we are starting our domain controller from the virtual machine which was earlier converted from our full backup. Now we have initiated a virtual machine. Actually this VM-DC is the virtual machine name. As told earlier, kindly understand the difference. The virtual machine name is VM-DC, whereas my domain controller name is still the same, which is actually dc.myhomelab.local, which I will show you. There you can see it's still dc.myhomelab.local with an IP address of 10.10.0.1. Now let's initiate an NS lookup and see if we could able to connect to our domain controller. I'll just show our main domain controller is still in the shutdown state. We have initiated a virtual machine actually. Let's type NS lookup. There you can see I could able to ping my domain controller. I could get an NS lookup of the status of my domain controller. There you can see it's still in the shutdown state. This NS lookup is actually connecting to my virtual machine domain controller. There you can see. Now let's see a summary of our domain controller. There you can see we have created actually 1 GB of RAM during our creation of a virtual machine. It has taken that 1 GB and the CPU which we have specified there. Now let's take a look at the points we have covered. There you can see these are the points which I have covered today. I have run a full backup of the domain controller and I have converted it to a virtual machine. I have performed a ping and NS lookup before a disaster recovery simulation, which is actually before the shutdown of this domain controller. And I have shut down the domain controller and then I have started the virtual machine, which is actually the domain controller in my vSphere client. This is the virtual machine which I have started, and then I have initiated a ping and NS lookup after the disaster stimulation. Now the disaster stimulation is actually in the scenario means that the main server is down or out due to some unforeseen circumstances, and we have initiated a domain controller startup from our backup, which we have converted it into a virtual machine. That's it. I think that makes your things clearer. Make note of these key points. You can download the VMware tools from the internet. Make sure you add a NetApp adapter during the virtual machine creation. That's it. Now what we have done here is we have actually converted a backup job into a virtual machine and have simulated a disaster recovery. That's it. I have completed the demo. Do share your feedback, which will encourage me to do more of this video. Thank you. See you next video. Thank you guys.